Here I am today. I am a Tapasray, the art editor for the Antonym, the magazine. And we have Artscape, where we usually feature one artist every month. Today, our artist is Tatyana Ostapenko. Uh, Glad to meet you, Tatyana. Glad that you're here with us today. So we'll have a very informal talk where we will try to understand Tatyana's viewpoint towards art and try to understand like what goes into her art and what she plans to do in the future with art. So welcome, Tatyana. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me to this interview. I'm really looking forward to talking to you.
If you want, Tatyana, you can introduce yourself, and then I will obviously have a written piece to go with that, with your CV and everything. So
It's always strange, right? Talking about oneself, and no matter how many times you do, no matter how many times I do, there's always this awkward pause of like, about me? You want me to talk about myself? I am a painter.
yeah.
I live in Portland, Oregon. Currently, I've been here for 10 years, but I am originally from Ukraine, and I was born and raised in Soviet Union. And my history and my heritage informs all of my artwork.
And you said like you were here for last 10 years or so?
I've been in the United States for 22 years now, so it's been a while, yes.
So what brought you over to United States? Art itself and now?
I have only been painting for 8 years.
Okay.
So I've done a lot of other things before I started painting. I didn't come to painting at all. I didn't paint at all until about 8 years ago, and did a lot of other adulting prior to pursuing something that I've always wanted to my entire life, but it always felt like on a back burner. It's not a viable, reasonable adult thing to do. But then I just kind of got fed up with the excuses and decided to go for it.
So what brought you to art from the childhood? Like you wanted to do art, or like you wanted to do painting from the very childhood. So what do you think like attracts you?
It's a very interesting question, and I don't think I have a very good answer for you. I don't remember myself before being fascinated with visual arts. As long as I remember myself, I've always been interested in painting and drawing. And I think to a greater extent than, all children like to doodle and draw and color, but I think to a much greater extent than that. I mean, I remember being like 8 years old and sitting around with art books in the house. I was always an introverted kid, and making copies of El Grecos. They're like these emaciated saints praying or something like that. And it wasn't because I liked the content of the images. I just thought that the way they were painted was so fascinating to me. So it was always about the medium. It was always about figurative depiction, kind of in the history of Western art, oil painting. It was just always completely fascinating.
Great. So when did you start oil painting first?
Actually, when I first started learning painting, which was only 8 years ago, I only used acrylics because I had this idea that oil paints are just so toxic. They're such crazy fumes. I'm going to get a headache. I'm going to get nauseous. And I think took me about 4 or 5 years of painting with acrylics to finally try oils. And turns out that I can handle oils in a way that does not make me ill at all. And it was funny because a few of my instructors at college kept telling me that I paint like an oil painter, yet I'm using acrylics, that there's kind of a dissonance between the medium and the expression. Mm-hmm. And now looking back, I'm like, absolutely, I don't know what I was thinking. But I use both. I still use acrylics because it gets a little tricky to work really large and really fast the way that I do with oils, not to get too technical and, shop talk. But I prefer acrylics for larger surfaces and for first layers of the painting, and oils on top, or just oils for smaller works.
Great. And so going back to Ukraine as such, so how do you think the art from Ukraine, like the existing art forms or the historic art forms have well, I'll ask about like how they evolved, but more like how they have impacted your work. So what is the contribution of say like Ukrainian art or erstwhile Soviet Union art on your art today or your
I
painting?
think the impact is really profound, and I think that my tendency toward figuration or even particular color schemes and the light quality in the paintings is just 100% comes from the socialist realism that was the only pictorial language of anywhere around that I grew up, and it was predominant. Think if you're think if whatever the contemporary art trends right now were the trends of advertising, and very explicitly. So propaganda advertising, kind of similar thing, right? In the Soviet Union, the advertising was not for the most part, it was not for material goods to consume, but for the idea that needed to be consumed and perpetuated within the society. And all of the art, there were, of course, underground art movements in Soviet Union, but it wasn't something that I was exposed to as a child at all. So everything had a very specific way of depicting the figure that is very much rooted in traditional oil painting, you know, Western tradition. However, there is a sheen of joyous hope and aspiration for the greater future. I don't know how much your readers yourself, I would imagine you're very familiar with the style of socialist realism, which was proclaimed the official art style that is appropriate for Soviet Union and was since late 30s until the end.
Yes, but I thought like in the post-Stalin era, the socialist realism has given way to more abstract or abstractionism a little. There was a movement. And so basically you grew up probably the same time maybe later than me, but you grew up in like 80s and 90s Ukraine, and you
Mhm.
think the socialist realism was still the theme there?
Definitely not in the 90s, because the 90s are already post-Soviet Union, right?
Yep.
Soviet Union falls apart in 1991. But you don't just quickly turn over. You can topple a government, but you're not toppling the visual language. And especially if there were a lot of mosaics that were executed in the style. So it's not like just a banner or a poster hanging somewhere. It's a mosaic, it's a part of the building, it's permanent. All the subway stations are highly decorative, even though not so much painting. They're in Moscow subway stations more so. But I think for me, the formative years and the influences went in the 80s, when that is the visual style. And now in retrospect and learning more about the avant-garde, not so much the avant-garde, the alternative movements, underground movements in art in Soviet Union, yes, there is an influence of abstraction, but that was not absolutely not visible whatsoever to a common person walking around on the street or walking into an art museum, or even somebody who's like curious about arts. I never ever saw anything. And all the arts education that was kind of, you know, basic education for, let's say, children in school to learn about art history, basically art history stopped with the Impressionism. Like there was no conversation about any avant-garde movement from, you know, everything that revolutionized the visual arts in the early teens in Europe. There was never ever a conversation about that, even in the 90s when I was growing up.
The figures or the characters in your painting, right? There's a lot of Soviet or maybe Ukrainian ladies there, like middle-aged or aged ladies. What? How do you get to those subjects? Like, what makes you paint them?
I don't think I get to them. I think they're always with me and they just demand to be painted. It doesn't feel like much of a choice or a conscious selection. It's, I think a lot about transgenerational trends, transgenerational trauma. And I think that those ladies are with me at all times.
Yeah,
And
actually, when I look at your paintings, they remind me of my grandma, or like. not typically my grandma, but those who are like farm workers who are strong enough character wise, and they hold the whole structure of the family, you know, and I somehow I find them represented in your painting. So that's why I was asking you whether you have similar things in mind, like you're trying to paint strong ladies, like
It's interesting that you're using the word strong repeatedly. I really like that. So
strong mental.
there's the mural that I painted recently, actually a year ago, but there are three older women from post-Soviet spaces. I cannot tell you, they're Russian, Ukrainian, Lithuanian. There's a similarity in the dress at the time. And they're just standing in an open field, and they're looking pretty content, actually. But the name of the mural, the title for the work, is The Real Strong and Silent Ones. Because, you know, there's this idea of the strong and silent type, kind of like the John Wayne of the American Westerns. And that's where the strength is, right? In this masculinity and this very few words. And it is my very strong opinion, feeling, gut knowledge, lived knowledge, embodied knowledge that that structure of that entire country on that vast continent that I come from resided solely on the shoulders of these older. Silent because they were silenced, not silent because they can't find words, but the society that does not give voice to women whatsoever, yet completely relies on the women's perseverance and character to carry through the generations.
Perseverance is the right word, yes.
Perseverance is a good one.
Yeah, but I think like the silence is their strength at the same time. But on the other hand, there was this painting, one old lady standing, and which catches my eye. You have those I think the tone canvas or something like you know, like the shades are different. What is the name of the painting? Babushka? No.
It's called Century.
Century. So what's going on in your mind when you have those, like, you know, the peeled off paints from on that canvas?
I don't think that I had a very specific conceptual idea or like imbuing meaning to each specific detail or, you know, technical aspect of painting that particular piece. Some of the decisions will always be purely formal for a painter, because we're talking right now primarily about concept, right? And the thoughts and ideas behind the content of the painting. But I'm a painter first, really, in a way. I'm not just, you know, here to do the propaganda for the older Russian women and their neglected silence. But so I really like to experiment with the surface. I really like to experiment with different paint applications. And at that point, when that painting already had a pretty resolved figure in the background, I just felt like I wasn't satisfied with the surface, so I wanted to work into it more. And those come from applying paint and transparent layers and having some tape overlaid and then being able to cut it off so they're sharp lines.
Now you're thinking about like experimentation, right? So, and I don't know like how and probably you can explain it to me. Like, so you start with a subject and then you move on to experimentation, and then something else comes out, or is it something more specific in your mind that you want this output? So how is your process? Like
completely open-ended. If I know what it's going to be like, then I'm not going to do it.
Okay.
Painting is a verb. Painting at the end is a noun. You end up with a noun, but the reason for the noun is that verb of the action of it. I am not interested in illustrating a vision inside my mind. That is completely, there are a lot of people who work that way, and I fully respect that process. We're all unique. We all have our different approaches and reasons for making work. For me, it's the process of staying with my subject matter that was interesting to me from the beginning. And then through the painting process, discovering something that I didn't know before. I want to end up with something that I've never seen before on my surface. I'm not interested in creating or recreating.
So the characters that you are depicting in your paintings, are different characters at the end. They might come from your subconscious mind, but they are
Mm.
uh, so okay. Let me put it rephrase this. How do you decide to put the tone, the color on that face? So whether it is be more like orange tinged, and you're getting me like orange or bluish tinge. How do you
Mhm.
decide based on your mood or based on the mood of the lady that you're trying to portray?
It's actually neither. That's a purely formal decision.
Okay.
That's about a paint. That's a painting question. I don't associate color with, I don't think about like, synesthesia, like color psychology, color sound. I am creating the content is a starting point. It's a jumping board. I want to spend time with the content. And I also use reference imagery. So none of this, while all of this comes from my subconscious, and my subconscious or my memory, my embodied memory is guiding me toward choice of specific imagery, I do rely on reference photos. A lot of them are the ones that I have taken myself during my travels in Ukraine. Some of them come from some amazing street photographers in the post-Soviet spaces right now. It's just fantastic content. But I always deviate from the photographic reference dramatically. I most always remove the figure from its context. So the figure is cut out. So all these paintings are based on collage, but again, it's not making a collage and then painting a copy of a collage. That's just the scaffolding. That's a rough structure of what the painting is going to be. And the color choices are, I'm interested in somewhat realistic depiction in a contemporary manner. So I rely a lot on the local, what we call in the art speak, local color. So the color that was occurring in the light in
True.
that present moment at the time when the photograph was taken. So those color choices that you're talking about, they're not really that difficult because I have material to start with.
Yep, sure. And most of your paintings have blue skies on the background. And I saw that even I think that was mentioned in one of your like the things that I have read about you. So why is it so? That's more like the vibrancy or the brightness of the open field, or it's more like you want like a neutral background which gives life to your pictures, the paintings.
It's an interesting question, and I don't think that I have a fully resolved, clear answer for you. The part of Ukraine that I'm from is a lot of rolling hills and I'm from a large city, but it's surrounded by a lot of agricultural fields. So, and also in Russian literature and traditional song, an open field has a lot of strong emotional connotations. So I think that I like a vastness of a landscape to contrast with the specificity, yet a collective nature of that figure. So it might have to do more with the land that I'm from and the landscape
Mhm.
that I internalized during my youth in the region that I'm from than any kind of specific conceptual. But then I think it's also about openness, and not openness in terms of emotional openness necessarily, but a vastness and spaciousness. That's the word I'm looking for, spaciousness, not openness. That I see the time and the place that I'm from as having extremely limited choices. So the vastness kind of counters for that.
How much do you think life here in the United States have or has morphed your work?
Well, I've never really made artwork in Ukraine, so it's hard. I cannot compare, right? And I left as a I left as a young person. And while I was always interested in drawing, I never thought about myself as an artist. I never really made artwork. I think that more than life in the United States, my contemporary art education has influenced my work because I feel like I'm coming from a stronger critical theory background rather than in the past I would have just wanted to paint pictures and make it look good. Where now I definitely have a strong conceptual underpinning into what I do.
True. And so you have actually have like you have showed your art, showcased your art in different countries, right? Korea, and let me go to the list. I think I have it somewhere.
It's
So,
not a very long list, I can tell you.
but there is one very interesting. You have like it's across the globe, which is
Mhm.
more interesting. So, for example, Korea. Um, how often do you go to the art forms of different countries or culture to look for, like look for innovative, not innovation, but look for, I would say, more like influence, like how do they influence your work, or do you even?
I don't think that I do, because I would personally definitely have concerns about appropriation. Being, a white person in the West making artwork and showing in privileged type of situations, I would be very wary of just looking for inspiration in those exotic supposedly places. So I think that that's really a proposition fraught with a lot of issues. And I think that I have such a strong influence that is already present for me. Um, while I'm interested in experimentation, I feel like there's so much in there already that what I need to do is to make more work along the lines of what I make, rather than constantly reach out to new sources, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and do you think like literature has influenced you at all?
Absolutely. It's very hard to be a Russian speaker um, artist who is not influenced by literature, or just like a person from that space who is a Russian speaker. Literature is such a big part of our life.
Who's your favorite author from Russia?
Oh, this is very difficult. I can't, I would not be able to pick that easily. I'm unfortunately not as familiar with the contemporary writers right now. I know some, but not nearly as many. But I can tell you what my biggest influences. I feel like this entire conversation is kind of more about like the origin story. So I think every person, especially my age, would have been so influenced by Bulgakov,
Yeah,
Mikhail Bulgakov. So the very famous novel that was banned, that was not, so there's always this feeling of the forbidden, right? Everybody wants to read the forbidden novel. Must be good if it's forbidden. So I read Master and Margarita when I was 9, and it's not a 9-year-old reading at all. But I loved it. And I think there's just a sense of literature, because so much was banned and so much was not accessible, had a forbidden fruit quality to it, and more of us read very young, at a very young age, and things that are maybe not exactly, not, it's not like it wasn't appropriate, but it takes more life experience to truly appreciate a lot of these things that I was reading as an 11 and 10-year-old.
so as an artist, what do you think, like in the near future, how do you think your art will be modified, or you want to go with something, some new ideas or concepts, or just you want to go on painting the ladies from Ukraine?
I think for me, the subject matter is important, but it's not necessarily, I don't feel, when I paint, I don't think about it as I am painting women from Ukraine. I'm a painter, and the act of painting is primary for me. And then I know that for all my desire to be a truly abstract painter, that's just not who I am. I need something to rest with, to spend time with. And I have vast photographic archives of both my photography and borrowed. And my gaze still rests on people, ordinary people, everyday people from the former Soviet spaces. So I don't think that I have exhausted for myself the subject of the Russian babushka,
Hmm?
that headscarf. I love painting that headscarf. It's just so
What is the
satisfying.
exact meaning of babushka?
Say it again.
What is the exact meaning of babushka? Like the translation,
Babushka is just a Russian word for granny.
granny, right? Yeah. So
Yeah,
grandma.
just, yeah,
Yeah.
it just means grandmother.
Okay.
So used pretty much exact same way as you would in English. You can say that, oh, that granny, you know, that doesn't mean your grandmother necessarily. It could be a collective kind of noun. And I think that my scale, the size of my paintings is getting larger, and I'm really enjoying working large. I've always wanted to. I've had some constraints, studio space and all that, but I have a solo show coming up in beginning of the next year, and those are going to be really big paintings.
So you do a lot of murals, right, these days?
I do some murals these days. I am about to start. I've been working, doing all the preparation work and design work for 1,000 square foot mural that I will be painting in July, but I haven't started the actual physical work on the wall yet. It's all digital and preparation right now.
Great. Yep. And let me go a little bit, you might find it tangential, but how do you think that, what is the, in your viewpoint, obviously, what do you think the artists contribute to the society? Like, what's the artist's or the painter's worth to the society?
It's actually I don't think it's tangential at all. I think it perfectly it's a great question. And I have to confess that it's been a big struggle for me because I am creating a luxury object
True. And
that has pardon me?
why luxury?
Well, I can't afford my paintings.
Okay, great.
Just that plain and simple. I can't afford them. And it's not just about the price point. It's more about the exclusivity. Places where oil paintings are exhibited or seen are not exactly most accessible, even if they are technically free. Let's say a gallery space is free to enter for anyone. However, it's a very intimidating feeling space. And most people, a lot of people that I know, and it really doesn't even have to do with any kind of socioeconomic standing, just don't feel like they belong in that world. It's very exclusive. I think the art world has created these barriers over the years to have this air of specialness or, again, exclusivity. And I resent that. I really don't like that. So murals, for that reason, were a really good segue for me to deal with this disquiet that I experience, because I think that there's a contradiction between my subject matter and my overall basis concept of why I paint, and then making these objects that can go only to a very certain, they're seen by only a certain small portion of the population because of where they're exhibited, and then even fewer can acquire them. But a mural is in the streets, it's very democratic, so I feel like it's much better continuation of my studio practice.
Okay, so many questions, but but so have you ever felt sadness or sorrow that some of your paintings you thought that they're really good, you know, like it should be valued more, and when not valued more? Have you ever had that?
Tell me what you mean by not valued more.
Like the price that someone bought it for.
Mm-hmm.
Probably, and it's in the relative sense that you have sold some other painting which you thought probably it's not that great work, but it had been sold at a higher price.
Well, I'm the one who sets my own prices at this point.
Okay, so you set your own prices. It's
Correct.
not like auctioning and bargaining, not like that, right? So, okay.
No, I set my own prices, and if I'm willing, you know, like if somebody is buying 10 of them, you know, we can talk about some wholesale prices. They're not that much lower than the retail. My prices have gone up through the years.
Where are you sad that some of your paintings which you really liked were unsold, where they were not sold, or nobody bought it? Have you ever had that? Okay, no. So good enough. So now coming back to my original question. So you have, so the objective of an artist, and obviously we start from most of us start from self-realization, right? So we want to explore ourselves, we want to like, you know, unfold that, and so we are into art, that kind of form. We want to express ourselves in that form, and then at certain point of time it is about selling, like whoever is buying. So automatically the consumers preferences play a role in your topic, in your subjects. So you probably will know, okay, so these paintings were sold more often, so I will recreate this kind of form. Or so might not be true for you, but that's where the artists go. And then the artists also, especially the painters, which I think, I don't know whether you agree with me or not, is basically painting is one that where, you know, like the it can transcend cultures very quickly because there's no language barrier, right? So people can understand immediately, or they can get hooked to it. So don't you think they have rather like a more you know, what should I say, like to tell the truth in the sense like the life experiences, like experience, you know, like whatever you feel is right, you need to tell it to your audience or to the world outside, and you can use your paintings for that. If I give you this whole spectrum of a painter, where do you fit?
So I personally don't know any painters who are like, wow, that painting sold real good. Like, let me make 10 more. I'm sure there are people like that, but that's kind of not my circle. We just make what we really want to make for the most part. You know, I make commission work, and that's a whole completely different conversation. But I don't have that kind of experience of, oh, grannies in the field sell real good. Like, because it's not true. Like, grannies in the field are an exotic product, but on the other hand, there are people who absolutely love my work and purchase it, and it's not exactly an immediate, like, oh, of course everybody needs a Russian grandma peasant standing in the field in their living room. I don't think about making my paintings as making products. It's a really strange position to be in, to be a self-represented artist who is living from her work, because I cannot treat my production the way a factory treats production, because then it just kills the experience. On the other hand, once the painting is finished, I have to pivot immediately and become a marketeer, you know, and a distributor. So I have to divorce those two. It's like I have two personalities, right? I have one is the one that sells the stuff and the other one who makes the stuff, but they should only talk so much. Otherwise, the integrity can be really compromised.
Next question is, how do you think, or what is the influence of art on your life? Part of it, I asked you the first question that how life influenced your art, but like how art influenced your life outside art, outside your paintings.
I mean, we're surrounded by artists' production, whether we realize it or not. I mean, there's a car that just drove by, and somebody might argue with me that an industrial designer is not an artist, but that's a very contemporary separation of what is art, right? It's a continuum. You know, you watch movies or TV shows at night, those actors are artists. So I think we're just really, this is another one of those problems that I have with this kind of like very rarefied art world idea. We call only art these things that are in the gallery, in the museum, and a lot of times it's like being put through the Western perspective of what is valorized as art, like this is craft, this is folk art, this is real art. Like, I just really don't like that. I think that there is artistic production that goes on in many, many ways that we don't consider and we don't really think about appreciating actually in our daily lives. Like, I'm wearing a sweater that most likely was designed by somebody. You know, sure, it's like mass produced, it's not artisanal, but
Do, do you think artists are more sensitive than non-artists are now?
sensitive to what? You know, we're all more sensitive to the things that we pay attention to. That's kind of the nature of our minds, right? When you, it's like it's almost like, you know, the confirmation bias, right? You learn about something existing and boom, you suddenly see it everywhere in the world and you're like, ooh, magic, now it's everywhere around me. It's like, no, you're just trained your mind, trained your brain to respond to a certain set of stimuli. So the same way, when I've taught some kind of beginner drawing classes when I was TAing at the university, and that whole conversation about like, oh, I can't draw, like I hold the pencil and nothing comes out, you know. And like, it's not about, yes, some of the drawing and some of the painting has to do with the hand-to-eye coordination and just the rote skill of having more control with a fine muscular action. But really, it's about learning to see. What artists are more sensitive in the way that's, I can only speak to visual artists, right? Because
Go ahead.
I play the piano, but I don't have rarefied sensibilities with my hearing. My hearing is not
Yeah.
that great, not sophisticated as a listener. And but you learn to see in a way because you pay more attention. So it's just about time spent, attention spent, and curiosity applied toward anything really that will make you more sensitive to that subject. So I can tell you exactly what value tone, you know, what pigments, like I can mix you any color that I'm seeing outside right now, right? But is it because I am more talented? No, it's just because I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. People who have never considered that will just see it's green, the house is green. But then it's like, but what kind of green, right? Like, is it lighter? Is it darker? Is it more saturated?
How about perception wise? So basically, you are going on a street, you are walking, and you see a woman, like drawing a shopping cart or so. Do you feel like, do you compare, do you suddenly, you feel like you're looking at another babushka, or maybe you're comparing with the babushka of your painting or your Ukraine? Do you feel like that? It's more like a perception, how you're seeing the world from a different, like an old woman is not an old woman now. It's babushka from your painting.
I don't think I do that. Um, I think my quality of perception in the United States is different from in Ukraine because you just use the very specific thing that differentiates Ukraine, let's say, or most
Yes.
of Europe from United States. As much as Portland is a more pedestrian friendly city than other United States cities, there's still not as much, you don't see as much humanity on the streets,
Yeah.
even in Portland, as you do where I'm from. Also, very few older people are walking on the streets in the United States. I'm sure compared to India, it's the same thing, right? We just have our older folks like neatly tucked away. And so I think that there is less, that I experience, there's less texture, there is less variety of life, and perhaps it's just that I'm still working through so many things that I associate with post-Soviet spaces that when I go there, I respond to visuals more. I engage more with the visual information there than I do here.
I think the artists are talented more than others, or they have skills that the others don't have.
Well, I think skills are acquired, right? Skills are developed. So that's kind of back to our trained perception. You know, am I just inherently more attentive to value variation and, you know, hue variation and colors? I mean, I don't know, maybe there's some sort of biochemical reason I am, but mainly I know for a fact that more I was painting, better I became at seeing color.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a skill and it's a trained skill. I think that I know now what you're referring to. So I have a real beef with the word talent. I
Mhm.
hate the word talent. There's only one other word that I hate more. It's genius.
Okay, great.
There's this toxic myth in the West,
Mhm.
started around the Renaissance time, about this master artist, this genius. Of course, they're always white and male. That goes without saying. God forbid they're anything else. And I just think it's a very toxic myth. And while we made a lot of, you know, we can argue progress in the arts since the Renaissance, I think that there's a portion of allocating, there's a problem with allocating art production to just, again, this like select few that have this great talent, and then everyone else is not allowed to dabble. I remember a friend of mine and me were walking down the street somewhere in Boston, and we end up sitting down maybe on a bench, and there was this guy sketching, you know, just kind of sketching people around, and we end up chatting with him. And she asked him a question that completely floored me, and I just could not understand where that can come from. She was like, well, what if you keep pursuing this art thing and you're not very good? And I don't remember how he answered it, but I could not even understand that kind of thinking, but I've been thinking about it quite a bit. So this idea of excellence, the idea of you're only permitted to pursue something. Nobody would ask an accounting student sitting there with their stats books, what if you start being an accountant and you're not the best accountant in the world? Like, it's perfectly fine to be a mediocre accountant, right? Because it's somehow socially acceptable, or I don't know if it's honorable, like non-threatening. There's something going on here. And I think it all has to do with this genius, you know, touched by the divine, right? So you either have it or you don't. And hated, toxic, on a mission to dismantle it as much as I can. So when people tell me like, oh, you're so talented, I could never do it. And I'm like, how many hours have you spent painting? They're like, well, none. And I'm like, yeah. So you need curiosity. You need to just be you need to be interested. I don't think that everybody needs to paint. No, absolutely not. However, if you have a genuine curiosity and you want to explore something and you feel drawn toward it, what I hate is that we have a society here in the West, and especially where I'm from, that you better be the best. You better be really good, or put it down and never touch it again. But what about just doing it for the joy?
Exactly. Yep. Okay. Let's end it with one of your paintings. So
end with joy.
So there is this painting Homeworld, right, which we have added to our piece. So basically, what goes into that painting? Like, what do you try to portray in that painting? If you remember the painting, you don't have it.
Yeah, I remember the painting, of course. So I think this is another one of those examples that I definitely never try to portray anything. I definitely do not want to be overly didactic, and I am not a symbolist painter where like this here means this and this here means that. I'm much more interested in, I think when you talked about those three types of painters, you know, like, or artists who are like just start doing something because they enjoy it and they're exploring themselves and they're exploring their world. If that's the first one of your three, then I am at the first level of maturity as an artist, because I'm still very much interested in having a very open-end exploration of why is this even interesting to me? But not a why with having to prove it, but just like more, this is interesting. I'd like to spend time with it. I don't even think about exploring, because exploring, again, to me has the connotation of conquering, you know, the great explorers. I'm like, I don't need to. I think that's a really important difference for me, though. My desire is just to spend some time with rather than explore. And that painting is actually more like a placeholder for something that I would like to do more in the coming months for my show. It has disorienting perspective. It doesn't have linear perspective in that painting. It doesn't make exactly spatial sense. And I'd like to play with that a little bit more, because most of my paintings, you know, people are standing on the ground and that's the sky above them. I think I'd like to play a little bit more with disjointed, disjunctive planes and spatial orientation in the paintings. That would be interesting for me right now. I'm going to confuse my viewer.
No, I don't think so. I think if you connect the dots, so basically you will come up with a nice picture of your mind. But anyway, so it was great talking to you. It was it was joy, a lot of joy.
Joy.
We will, I think we'll keep in touch, and we will follow your works. Audience, the people who will be reading, will be viewing this or reading or looking at your paintings will probably get more interested in your works and your website. I will give the link of the website.
Perfect. Thank
It
you.
will help the people to find you.